My Govanen. Welcome to the Tolkien Lore Channel, and Happy New Year! We've officially made it to 2021 despite the madness that was 2020, and given that this is perhaps the most eagerly awaited change of the year in the calendar in my lifetime, I figured it was a good time to talk about the Shire Calendar and some other calendars in Middle-earth and how they compare to our modern-day calendar and show how that results in some slightly different dates than we think we're getting from the book. So let's take a look at some calendars. So the first thing to note about the Shire calendar, which in the book is often referred to as the Shire Reckoning, uh, and a lot of times we may mistake this for merely the difference in year between what the Shire considers the year and what the rest of the world considers the year, because the Shire year is 1600 years behind basically everybody else's. But it's also a difference in terms of how they reckon their calendar day by day as well. And in the Shire calendar, the way this works is every month has 30 days, and that includes February. And there are 5 days that are kind of not really considered. I mean, they're kind of part of the months, but not really part of the months. But they're the first day of the year is called 2 Yule, the last day of the year being 1 Yule. So New Year's Eve, New Year's Day is 1 Yule, 2 Yule. And then in the middle of the year, you have Mid-Year's Day, which is not considered a day of the week. So it doesn't get a Sunday, Monday, Tuesday type designation at all. And then bookending the Mid-Year's Day, you have 1 Lithe and 2 Lithe. And unlike our calendar, where we add an extra day to February in leap years, the hobbits add an extra mid-year day, more or less, and they call it overlithe. So they get 4 years in the middle of, 4 days in the middle of the year on leap years. As a result of this, the fact that the mid-year day doesn't really count as a day of the week, every single year starts on the same day of the week, and according to the appendices, that's Friday, and ends on, the corresponding, the other day of the week. Wait, I may be getting that wrong. I think it begins on Saturday and ends on Friday. As a result of this weird setup where they have these days that are kind of not really considered part of the month, the January dates are 1 day behind. So January 1st for their calendar is actually January 2nd for our calendar. February, it catches up because we have 31 days in January and they only have 30. But then because February has 2 extra days in their calendar, it then falls behind again, such that March is 2 days behind. So the Gondorian New Year, which starts on March 25th, in the Shire calendar, March 25th is not what our March 25th is. It would be for us March 27, although we'll get to this a little bit later. The actual March 25th for the Gondorian calendar actually is March 25th. It's complicated. So for January, it's a day behind. February, it's correct, except for the 2 extra days. And then March is 2 days behind. April and May are 1 day behind. Then June is correct. But then because we have the middle days in the year, July is 3 days behind. August is 2 days behind. September and October, 1 day behind. And then November and December again match up with our calendar. So you can use this to kind of figure out what day in our calendar is the same as the day in the Hobbit calendar. So, for example, a lot of the Tolkien world knows that September 22nd is Hobbit Day because that's Frodo and Bilbo's birthday. Well, September is a day behind, so actually the Hobbit's September 22nd is our September 23rd. Now, because of the way the Hobbits do their leap year, adding the day in the middle of the year instead of February, this of course throws off this calculation a little bit in leap years for March, April, May, June, and then, it throws those off a little bit, but you can work that out. But for typical years, this is how you would figure it out. Now, the interesting thing here is that the Hobbit calendar is a derivative of what was the Númenórean calendar, basically. And the Númenórean calendar they got from the Kingdom of Arnor before it fell, and this calendar was continued, of course, in Gondor. And there's 2 versions of it. The original version was called the King's Reckoning, and this was modified by the steward Mardil in Gondor to what is called the Steward's Reckoning, which is a little bit closer to how the hobbits do it. In the original King's Reckoning, every month had 30 days except the 2 months that correspond to our June and July, which had 31. And then the first, last, and middle days of the year were days that didn't belong to any month. And of course, I should mention here, of course, that they didn't call months, January, February, March, April, etc. They had, Elvish or Mannish names for all these months, but I'm not going to get into that. That's overly complicated. And you're not going to remember all those names unless you are already a super nerd and you already know them anyway. So, but then the Steward's Reckoning modified the King's Reckoning and took the extra days from the June and July months essentially and put them between March and April and September and October respectively. So you ended up with one day before the beginning of January and at the end after December, one day in the middle of the year, and then a day between March and April, and a day between September and October. And that's how the Steward's Reckoning managed their year. So the hobbits basically took this and took the day from the March and April and the September and October, put that back into the middle of the year, and that's how the hobbits derived their calendar. Of somewhat less importance, because we're not immortal like elves, the elves had a very different system altogether, according to the appendices in The Lord of the Rings, and they did kind of recognize a solar year, but they mostly dealt in what was called a yen, which really meant 144 of our years, which when you think about it, elves being as long-lived as they are, it makes sense that they would measure time in much greater lengths. And their year was divided into 6-day weeks, and then there would be, several thousand weeks in a year. The solar year they kind of recognized because that's how the seasons change and whatnot, but they did it differently than we do. And Tolkien doesn't go into as much detail into the Elvish calendar here in the appendices. I believe in the History of Middle-earth there is a place where he goes into a lot more detail. But it's kind of like original draft versions of the appendices, and so it's not really the final version. But he focuses on the fact that in the Elvish solar year, which is not technically a solar year, but it's basically equivalent, he has the Rivendell calendar, and apparently different elves have different calendars, divided up into 6 what you might call long months or short seasons, 2 of which have 72 days, and then the other 4 of which have 54 days. This only adds up to 360, and then to make up the other 5, similar to what the Númenórean calendar did, they have 3 special days in the middle of the year and 1 at the beginning and the end. And then every 12 years, instead of doing a leap year every 4, they added 3 additional days in the middle of the year. So an Elvish calendar, luckily we never really encounter one, but if we did, it would have very different looking dates than what we see in the Mannish or Hobbitish calendars. So that's a basic rundown of the calendaring systems in Middle-earth as of the Third Age. So there's more detail you could get into. He actually goes into the history of how these calendars developed and how the Númenórean one goes way back to Hodor in the First Age and all this kind of stuff. But I just wanted to give like a basic overview of how the calendars kind of match up to ours. So especially in the Lord of the Rings, where everything is based off the Shire Reckoning, you can compute what the actual date would have been in our calendar. Of course, assuming, that their calendar continued continuous all the way through history up to ours, which theoretically it would have had to, simply because the end of the year and the beginning of the year is still, in the middle of winter and all that. So it should theoretically add up. And Tolkien, even playing with the theme of, this is a translated work and continuing that conceit, talks about the fact that, some of this data is really hard to interpret and they don't have a whole lot of stuff that I can work with the Elvish calendar, so I can't figure all this out with detail. So it's fun to read on its own terms, just because Tolkien, as usual, is so into his own world that he, you believe him almost in terms of that he's translating some old ancient work. But anyway, that's the calendars. Hope you enjoyed that. If you did, please do give it a thumbs up and share it around. You can follow me on Twitter for some occasional Tolkien-related trivia questions. Hope you had a great holiday season and have a great new year. If you want to follow the channel, you can subscribe here, and you can support the channel here, and you can find 2 other of my videos here. And I'm also on Rumble, by the way, so you can find that link in the description if you want to follow me there. Until the next time, I'm the Tolkien Geek signing out for the Tolkien Lore channel. Namarie.